I told you I can't help but move to that song. I don't know what's up.
Yeah, no, you have to. I mean, like, I felt like I should, but then I didn't want to steal focus.
Right.
Mhm.
Well, happy darn CultureCast Day, everyone, and welcome Brenda Hsueh to our conversation and this CultureCast. I'm super fired up to have you.
Thanks. I'm excited to be here.
Right on. I mean, I think everyone's read about you, but just really quickly, Brenda is a unicorn in the entertainment industry. I say that because to be a badass writer, and I think the diversity of writing that you have done and that has been produced, whether it's comedy, How I Met Your Mother, also, I didn't realize Truth Be Told is
Yeah.
also on your resume. And for those of you, it was kind of really the zeitgeist of what was going on with podcasts back then on true crime, and then to turn that into a series, that was pretty amazing and pretty
Mhm.
helpful going into COVID, actually. So that diversity of TV writing, but then most recently with a current feature release that is out right now, Disney and Pixar's Elemental, which I cannot wait to get into. You are a darn unicorn, girl. Just saying that.
Yeah.
Um,
Well, it's definitely exciting that it's finally coming out. Elemental. I worked on it for 2.5 years, so it's a long animation is a long process. So to see it finally come to fruition is exciting.
It's pretty amazing. And actually, everyone, if this is your first time joining a culture cast, it's really about that. Let's talk about culture, whether it's pop culture, all things culture and inclusion. And more specifically, we have the chance to talk to leaders and take ideas from what they have been doing, what they've been working on, and apply it into our own lives, whether it's for our community or within the work that we do, and help create and cultivate environments where others can thrive. And so that's why we're here. And Brenda, I just want to jump into it. How does one get on this pathway to become a writer? I mean, where did you grow up? And was there something in your life that kind of pointed you in this direction?
It's funny because yeah, it is kind of random. I think growing up, I'm a Chinese immigrant. Like my parents are first gen immigrants, and I feel like it really wasn't a real consideration to go into Hollywood. Like that just didn't seem
Yeah.
like a real job. It wasn't sensible. Like it's obviously very risky. And so I was kind of a nerd, and I went to Yale and I majored in English, but
Yeah.
I just thought like, oh, English is useful. Like
Yeah.
I'm going to probably use writing. I never took a creative writing class. I never, it was all just like writing about Jane Austen or Shakespeare. And even it's funny. I basically was like, well, what do I do after college? And I was kind of on the path to doing television news producing. I'd
Okay.
interned at 2020. I had kind of this job lined up at MSNBC, like in New York City. And I thought that that was like this sensible thing to do. And I basically, but then at, my senior year, actually my junior summer, my mom got diagnosed with lung cancer. And so
Oh my
my parents
goodness.
were separated. And
Yeah.
I basically, she moved out to LA to be with her family and the better weather and to have the support network. And so I basically, after graduation, moved out to LA. I like gave up like my boyfriend, my friends,
Oh,
my
wow.
job in New York, that MSNBC job, gave it all up to move to LA. And at that point I felt very derailed professionally. I was like,
Yeah.
I'm doing this for my family, I'm doing this for my mom, and like, I don't know anyone out here. And it's funny because as a frugal Asian woman, she was like, not only do you have to take care of me, but you have to make money. And so I basically had to also tutor. Like I was tutoring like
Oh my
over 20
goodness.
kids in San Marino, and bluffing my way through any topic that I could sort of like fake my way through. And so, yeah, so I was doing that for a while, for a year. And in that year, I think the thing about being in LA is that it's inevitable you meet somebody in the entertainment industry. It is the
Yeah.
industry of this town. And so I was at an alumni function and I met this writer who used to write on Seinfeld, and we just kind
Oh,
of hit it
wow.
off. And he was like, "Hey, why don't you try writing?" And I was like, first of all, I was like, oh, I guess you can make a living at this, and also I was like, yeah, the thing about writing is that you don't have any startup cost. You can just do it from home, and it kind of is the perfect thing to do when you're taking care of your mom. And I was like, okay. And I chose half-hour comedy because honestly, I'm a little lazy, and I thought that the half hour was the shortest. And I
Yeah.
was okay, yeah, that one.
Yeah.
Actually the hardest because you have to do, story, character,
Yeah.
and be funny and do it all in like 22 minutes. So it really was ambitious actually. But I just sort of started to teach myself, and the way I did that is I basically read really good examples of what I wanted to do. So at the time there was a lot of these fan sites where fans would transcribe
Yeah.
every Seinfeld episode, every Friends episode, and
Wow.
I would just read all of them. I was like, I want to read good examples of what I want to do, of what I want to be able to do. And so that's how I kind of taught myself. And then I, obviously writing specs
Yeah.
basically, doing that in my little cave in my room alone. And after, and as a sensible Asian, I also was like, I'm going to give myself 2 to 3 years to break into this business. I was like, because that's like grad school, and at least I'm not paying tuition. I just have to support myself, and so I felt like that was a fair amount of time to give it. And so I think it was around just past 2 years, I was like, how do I get a job? This is obviously, I had no connections. And I mean, a lot of people can become a PA or a writer's assistant, and then they work their way up at a show. But I honestly didn't even know how to get that job. So even a PA job. So I entered a contest, which is kind of the best thing when you have no way else to get into an industry. And as I said, like, it was important to me to like make money. And so I picked, there are a couple of these fellowships, and I picked one that actually pays you, and it's the Disney ABC Writing Fellowship, and it pays you for the year. And it's a really good starting salary, and it's very competitive for that reason. And I applied, and I kind of remember saying to myself, like, if I get this, I'll keep going. And if not, then I gave it a shot, and this is after obviously I've been honing my writing for like 2 years, and so I submitted a script, and I got it, and I got in, and it was like such a great opportunity. They give you a year to work on your writing, to work with executives, actual ABC executives. I got lucky enough because my year they had an opening on a show to take a fellow on to work on a show, a half-hour comedy, and I like 3 of us interviewed, and I was picked, and yeah, I got my first job that way. And I was able, once you get your first job, it's much easier to get an agent, and so I got an agent, and then that was my big break into the industry.
Oh my goodness. I think, and I just saw a note here that Mike posted, way to manifest it, Brenda, like everything that you've done. But oh my gosh, there's so much to react to and to ask about. First of all, how is your mom?
I mean, she passed, but like I knew that. That's why it's like lung cancer at that time was like terminal. But I got a really, really amazing year with her. Like, and we had a tough, contentious, teenage childhood years with each other. And I think like it was actually really nice to spend that time together and to like really get to know her as a person, as opposed to my mom. And so, and also, even though it was really sad, like I would never have found this career that I love.
Exactly.
You know what I mean? Like it's so weirdly serendipitous.
Yeah, I think, and I mean, bless your mom. And I agree with you. I was just about to say, things in life happen for a reason. And even hearing about your journey, and first of all, you're not only a nerd, you're like a really badass, smart nerd. The fact that you went to Yale, just say that, to even get into Yale and then have this job lined up, and then getting into, hey, your priority is your family, and your mom asked you to help her. And I fully feel you, girl. I mean, I think about my parents, also first generation. I'm first generation American, so born here and living cross culturally, right? So they never lived in America. There's certain things that happen here in the US that they've never experienced in the Philippines. And I feel you too on that. relationship that I think Asian women, daughters and mothers have with
Yeah.
each other. And
It's kind
so,
of like a given that, that you are gonna sacrifice yourself to take care of your parent. Like, it's
uh-huh.
like, which is not necessarily a white thing. Like, I'm like, and I didn't even question it, like I was like, oh yeah, I have to do it, and it's ironic because before she got diagnosed, she was really like tough lovey and was like, don't think you can come back after college. You got to support yourself. You're not going to come back, live at home. And I'm gonna, yeah. And then I was
Yeah.
like, oh, I'm like, now you need me to come back. I'm
Oh
like,
my
oh, but
gosh.
you want me now? Like,
Yeah, it's so funny. My mom was the same way. Like after college, she had found out that my dad would like give me a 20 here, 100 there. I'd go visit them. I went to Cal Poly undergrad, and like she found out that dad gave me money, and she's just kind of like, you got to pay that back. You know what I mean? So there's that. And I think the similarity, although I think further future, my mom also was diagnosed with lung cancer. You and I haven't talked about this, but during COVID, you know,
wow,
and the good news is she survived. She had a
that's
lower,
amazing.
like a right lower lobectomy, like that, and she's thriving. And I hear you though. I think the role that young Asian women or that relationship that you have with your family, there is that expectation that when you become an adult, let me tell you, I feel more than adult. That when your parents get older and they're not well, then even before they're not well, like that, there's an expectation actually that you take care of them
Yeah,
because they
because
provided
they
a life for
sacrifice so
you
much
here.
and work so much for you that it's
Yes.
time to pay that back.
Yeah. And so I feel like your journey from, okay, something was pulling you to the West Coast and even just kind of navigating this on your own. I know that you had like this alumni network and maybe people said try writing, but the fact that you figured out how to do it yourself, a little DIY writing and like finding all that stuff online and then just modeling that, it reminds me of how I think as a young child or growing up in Southern California, how I kind of assimilated. Like I would see things that kids were doing, and I'm like, well, I can do that, and had no clue. And it would just be like, let me just figure that out. If I
Oh yeah,
observe
no,
and
for
pick it
100%. I
apart.
remember my parents, like, my parents made, my mom mostly cooked Chinese food. And I remember being a kid, I was probably like 10 or something. And I was
Yeah,
at my friend's house and her mom made grilled cheese. And
yeah.
I was like, this is amazing. I loved it. I was like, oh my God. And I remember going home and asking my mom to make grilled cheese. And she was like, I don't know how to make that. She's like, if you want to make that, you got to figure out how to make that. And
Yeah,
I remember going back to that American white mom and being like, hey, how do you make grilled cheese? And she showed me. And then I remember having to go to the supermarket with my mom and buying like Wonder Bread and like American cheese and butter
amazing.
and like having to make it at 10, like having to make it for myself.
Yeah, I mean, I think we've not talked about this, but if there's so many similarities, like we figured out how to microwave hot dogs like at home. Because it's not a traditional food that my parents would cook, at
Yeah.
home. So that's interesting. And I think like this,
But it
I
was good. It
yeah,
really taught us, I think, independence. You're right. Like I was like, she's like, well, you're gonna have to figure out how to make that. If you want that, go ask and do it yourself, kiddo. Like,
yeah.
and so I'm like, I feel like, it was a little tough lovey, but I think it did teach me a lot of like, go being like if there's a problem, you're gonna have to solve it yourself.
Oh my gosh, they sound so similar. I mean, that's like a whole. We need to have drinks over this conversation. So, um, but yeah, it is tough love, and it does teach independence, and it also gives you a chance to build character and resilience at the same time as a child, right? So
Totally.
that's wild. And
Yeah, but
so,
I also think it's so interesting because I think some kids like are develop this resilience, and some kids can't. It's a little genetic too. I think I'm very lucky that like this hardship and it actually made me stronger. You know what I mean? And I think it can
yeah.
be overwhelming for some people. So I'm very grateful that I was at least like wired to sort of handle it.
Yeah, I totally hear you. I mean, I feel that too because like my parents worked all the time,
Mm-hmm.
and
We're latchkey kids.
I was gonna say I grew up with a key around my neck,
Mm-hmm.
and we had like this code. Remember telephones? It'd be like, all right, don't answer the telephone, and here's like I'm gonna make it up. It was like I'll let it ring 3 times, hang up, and then I'll call you again, and then then you'll know it's mom calling. It was like that kind of thing.
Wow,
So
that makes me a little paranoid too. It's like, like you just gotta
we
get code.
I know we were independent and yet, we had to figure it out. So you're right. And I think as kids, there are some kids who didn't have that experience. And maybe that says a lot, thank you for sharing, being so open about, your upbringing, because it says a lot about the story you were sharing with us on navigating LA, figuring out how to be a writer, breaking in and just, giving yourself that grace, but also a timeline. You're like, I'm either going to do this or not, and then move on to the next thing.
Yeah, because I mean,
Yeah.
some people will try for 10 years, and I'm like, I'm just not that person. I'm gonna need to hit a certain mark by a certain point because
Yeah.
like otherwise. Because also, by the way, I do love a lot of things. Like I love being a writer, but I'm like I could maybe go into business, or there's other
Yeah.
things that I enjoy that I would be like gratified by.
Yeah. And I guess not a surprise you're an English major. I'm just saying. I mean, you have this amazing career as a writer. And the fact that English was your major at Yale, and that I think that orientation, it just provides a lot of foundation to what you're doing, and I'm connecting the dots as I'm listening to you. So that's pretty amazing.
Yeah,
So
actually, I feel like it goes even further back because when I was a kid, we were like grew up in Long Island, largely white, a lot of Jewish, Italian people. We were one of the few Asians
yeah.
in school, and so my sister and I were only a year apart, and so we didn't have a lot of friends, and we would just play with each other, and we created this world called Dollyland, and our room was called Dollyland, and we would play with our stuffed animals and give them characters and storylines and like act out entire like arcs and stuff, and I'm like, oh my god, like I did that. I was like, it was basically like being a writer, except instead of humans that are talking, saying your words, you
Yeah.
just have stuffed animals. And I was just like, oh my god, I was kind of doing that as a kid, like for that was my favorite thing to do. And so weirdly looking back, I'm like, I guess it kind of was something now that I do for my living. It's so interesting.
Yeah. I think it was meant to be. I was in this focus group, gosh, this was a few years ago, and it was Jim Collins, Good to Great, and he was doing research. And I'm probably going to say the wrong terminology, but I think people regenerate or reinvent, but they stay at their core. And if you go all the way back to childhood, you're doing something that's kind of related to childhood. And I think about we were the same. I mean, we grew up in Southern California and we were in LA, but then we moved to the suburbs for a better public education. And because we had to go home, like when we were kids, right? High school was different. My brothers and I would be the same way. We would take the stuffed animals. My difference was it would be like, okay, today I'm going to create a design studio and I'm going to be a fashion designer. And the stuffed animals would be clients and they would come
Hmm.
in and like define, I want this. And then my brother and I would like sketch what they would get. Or like if my older brother, if he was playing, we would pretend we would run like a restaurant, like a
Nice.
restaurant, and get the step stool and put it in the kitchen and pretend that was the ordering window.
Oh,
And like,
amazing.
they would come up and, and then we'd write little tickets. So it was like business
I
orientation.
know we had one of our
Yeah.
scenarios was we ran an architecture firm called Ramshackle Architecture. And it
Nice.
was like, yeah, no, we had all different scenarios. It was like hilarious.
Yeah. I believe though, I think it's like everything that you did as a child kind of manifests into what you're doing as an adult. And my parents thought I was going to be a doctor, and I was great in math and science and ended up switching to business mid undergrad. I was a biology major. And then, human resources was like a total random kind of, I went into this direction. But if I think about it, I was doing HR, like people and the day. Like, even though I was different when we moved, I was always about like getting people organized, finding, the right experience for everybody. I had this group of friends and I would tell them, okay, we're going to have a certain theme. Like we're going to dress a strawberry shortcake one day for school and people would do it. And so, and in high school, it was like involved in cheerleading and sports and all of that, but it was not so much about school. That was important to get education, but it was also that experience. And so that's that there's so many parallels. But I want to jump into like, let's talk about culture. And I want to get a little bit into your writing before we get into Elemental. So fast forward, here you are, the successful writer. And let's talk about what is the culture like being a writer on these various shows, you were so fortunate, but meant to be and talented enough to get this fellowship and then land on a show at ABC. I'd love to get your perspective on what is that culture like being on a writing staff and being on a show?
Yeah, I mean, honestly, it's changed from when I started, like way
Okay.
back when. But definitely early days in comedy writing, half-hour comedy writing, especially the writers' rooms were really very male dominated, and I was often like the only female, but not always, and that's changing,
Yeah.
thankfully. But that was definitely something to navigate because I think back then there was a little bit of a like, oh, women aren't funny or whatever kind of
Yeah.
stereotype, and that it was like it's interesting, like I feel like having to navigate it was like, so it manifested in this way actually where there's this thing happening where I had this um like a hoarse voice for months, like, and
Oh,
no other symptoms. I'm like, it's just hoarse voice. And I'm just like, I finally went to the ENT, the ear, nose, and throat doctor, and he stuck a scope down my throat and was like, oh, you have vocal nodes. And I'm like, what? That's like what Adele gets. Like, what?
yeah.
Am I talking too much? Or he's like, no, he's like, it is from vocal strain. It is usually from speaking at the wrong pitch, at straining at the wrong pitch. And I'm like, what? This is so weird. And then I
Wow.
was talking to my friend Anjali, who is also a female comedy writer. And she's like, oh my God. She's like, I had that too. She's like, I think this is a female comedy writer physical problem, like ailment. And I'm like, what? She's like, yeah, our friend Kristen Newman has this also. She's also a female comedy writer.
What?
I was like, what? And I realized, I'm like, oh my God, it's from like basically vocal strings. What I realized is I was subconsciously pitching and speaking in a lower tone, like a
Oh,
lower voice that
wow.
was lower than my natural pitch,
Yeah.
and trying to be heard in this room of guys. So I was basically kind of like Elizabeth Holmesing without even realizing it. Like I was trying to fit in with
Wow.
all these guys and sound more guy-like. So I was pitching lower and also trying to be louder. And so I was straining my voice at this unnatural pitch. And I'm like, oh my God. And I gave myself vocal nodes. And so had my female friends in the room. And
Oh
I'm like,
my
oh my God, that's so
goodness.
crazy.
Yeah, I think that is crazy. And it's, and I'm fascinated about culture, regardless of what company or industry that you're in. And now I think there's a lot more openness, and culture is a big deal with companies now. It's all about that. But if you think about, I feel the same way, like growing up in my career, having to feel like you have to assimilate, right? And for me, because
And
people
the
do
crazy
know,
thing is, though,
yeah,
I didn't even realize I was trying to
yeah,
assimilate. Like that, it was like a
yeah,
subconscious thing, and it was hurting my body. Like it was just like, wow, this is
yeah.
so, insidious. Like you're just like, it's like subconscious.
Well, yeah, and I think it's kind of the pressure that no one's telling you to do that, but it's all
Right.
almost about like, how do I survive versus how do I thrive? And I think that's the difference. And how do we help people today, bring their full selves and be their full selves in whatever it is that they're doing, what they're passionate about, and not feel like they have to snap to or, fit in or assimilate. Because I think the way I relate to that, for me, I've always had a point of view, but I was so serious and so quiet, in meetings where my managers were like, okay, what's up with this is how you are one on one. And then you go to these meetings and we don't hear from you, And to me, it was more intimidating because I was likely the youngest and looked different, all of that. Right. And I'm like, how do I get in there, you know, and
Yeah.
holding myself back. So that's
Yeah.
wild. So did you finally just go, okay, knock it off and be
I
you?
had to go to a speech therapist just to
Oh,
unlearn like how to talk.
oh my
Like,
gosh.
yeah, just unlearn this subconscious behavior. It was only a couple sessions and taking some practice, but then I realized like, okay, this is how you fix it. And now I don't have vocal nodes anymore. But I mean, it's interesting. Like, I feel like my journey, like I've always been very like assured and kind of passionate, and like I really
Yeah.
believe in what I believe, and that's okay, and that serves me well now. But starting out, it's not it can get you fired, and it can get you like, it is this really interesting thing of like learning, because it's almost like the opposite of what
Yeah.
you were saying, you know what I mean? Like, and I think that was something I had to learn to navigate, which I think the first thing I got feedback on was like, hey, you got to let things go. You know what I mean? And I was like,
But
oh yeah, this is not my show. This is your show, and
yeah,
I need to like let it go. And that was one of my first lessons in one of the on How I Met Your Mother that I learned, and it was very valuable. But like, yeah, but it's also like learning when. I guess the sweet spot is knowing when to fight for things and
that's
when to let
right.
them go.
And actually, I think you can always still be you and believe in what you believe in. And then there's always that professional lens. I always think about, okay, put that professional vest on. And although I strongly believe this is the cause or this is the
Yeah.
objective.
Oh, this is
And yeah,
their vision. I'm, you know what I mean? Like
yeah,
ultimately recognizing that
yeah.
and trusting the process.
That's
Um,
really, yeah, that's interesting. I mean, and I think that's a good lesson learned. And by the way, I mean, How I Met Your Mother was, this generation's Friends, right? I think
yeah,
about that, right? That whole ensemble. And I think it's pretty iconic that you had the chance to come work on that show.
yeah, it
Um,
was so fun.
so I think, why don't we just jump into, though, let's talk about Elemental. Okay, and like when you and I first met, and I'm like, oh yeah, Elemental. And I think what most people talk about when they think about Elemental, oh, it's this cute little, not little, but this cute animation about these two young kids or characters falling in love, right? And how fun is it? And so
Yeah.
I'd love to get your
I mean,
perspective
I
on,
think
yeah,
the impression I've
yeah,
gotten from the world is that I think people think it's a kids movie, and of course, all Pixar movies are kids movies, but
yeah,
they're also meant to be for adults also. And
yeah,
really, what I love about this movie, it truly is for it works on both levels. And what I like about it also is that it is like speaking of impacting culture, like I
yeah,
think it's important. Like I think it's trying to say something. Like I'm so like fortunate to be in a position to kind of help create culture, like
yeah,
what through art, through content that's out there, and a lot of people watch because that's what influences our culture. And I
yes,
feel like Elemental, and I wish was more known about it is that it is trying to say something about diversity. It is a metaphor for immigration and diversity. Like each element is a character and a wave
yeah,
of immigration. You know what I mean? Like the water people are the first ones to arrive.
yeah.
And then it's like, and it's like, and the fire people are the newest immigrants. And like the newest immigrants, the world isn't built for them. People are
Yeah.
a little scared of them.
Yep.
Like it's like being a new immigrant, whether you were Irish or Italian
Yeah.
or, or Chinese or whatever, it's and what I love about it is that it is a metaphor. It's not literal. So any POC immigrant group can
Yes.
relate to this struggle. You know what I mean? And then ultimately it's a culture clash romance between a fire, like a new fire immigrant, and a water being the
Yeah.
dominant
Yeah.
society, and seeing how that the challenges of that and also the beauty of that. And so I feel like it's actually very sophisticated, and just
Yeah.
like and I feel like that part isn't, like, I don't think adults realize that, and like adults without kids, it's like actually kind of a great date movie or whatever. You don't, it's
Yeah.
not just for kids, and it's saying something that I think is important for our culture, and that's why I'm trying to like get the word out there.
Yeah. No, I think it's giving good insight to people who are not familiar with it. And I agree with you. On the surface, one might say, oh, it's a family movie and, bring your kids to it. And I agree with you. I love that it's the different elements representing different immigrants. It could be anybody, right? But it also is a story about, moving. I'd say I know here in the U.S. because I've lived it with my family, like pursuing this American dream, and there's lessons learned, from your past and like how to fit in or how to blend in, et cetera, with different cultures. And I think about, and for adults that really didn't grow up with that. I'll just say that,
Yeah,
I think going to elemental is a good education and
totally.
enlightenment, right?
I like,
On
a lot of parents have said like
culture.
their
Yeah.
kids have, like, it's a way to get their kids even aware of this to talk about,
Yeah.
you know what I mean? Like, and because yeah, sometimes and then also a lot of like POC immigrants have been like, oh my God, I really feel it. And speaking of like sacrifice and your parents, like it is a lot about that. And it's,
Yeah.
Pete Sohn is Korean, he's the director, and it really was the inspiration for this movie was kind of a love letter to his Korean parents who like worked so hard for him and like, sacrificed so much, and like,
Yeah.
and the kind of the beauty of that, but also the burden of that.
Yeah.
And how to like navigate that. The main character has to like figure that out. And so like yeah, so it's very, I think, emotionally resonant for a lot of people.
Yeah, I think it's pretty amazing. And I think it's, if people aren't hearing this now, it's a great way to, if you're not familiar at all, and what it's like to be a person of color immigrant, coming to this country or growing up in that. It's unique. So I think about like growing up too, where kids would come over, like my friends from school would finally come over to our house, and we would be having like something as simple as a birthday party, although my birthday was in the summer and like we weren't in school, but I would still try to invite friends over. And then my parents would say, oh, just have their parents come over too. And Filipino potluck. And oftentimes there would be a pig on the table, right? And they're like, oh, we had no idea that this was a luau theme. We're like, no, not a luau. It's just kind of what's up, when
That's
the
amazing.
family
Also,
comes
by the way, I
together.
had a birthday party and I got a Filipino full roast pig with an apple in its mouth, and it was
Yes.
delicious. So good.
So good. Yeah, my dad had this spit that he created that was motorized. Like, no, it was hardcore.
I'm
But he
amazed that he made it himself. Like yeah, that's a long time.
Yeah, yeah,
It's a long time.
he was very handy and figured things out. So anyway, going back to culture, I think it's great to just let people know, hey, just to get some insight, because I feel like this is also where you may not be an immigrant or a person of color immigrant, but the emotion of it, right? The story of it, you can relate to, or you might be able to see yourself in, right?
Yeah, and I think that's why it's also doing really well internationally, because
Yeah,
I think because they don't look Asian or they don't look black, like everyone can kind of
yeah,
put themselves in this situation. And someone was telling me like they are white and they went to France to just live there for a while and feeling
yeah.
like an outsider, feeling like he was like, oh my God, I totally related to this movie. You know what I mean? So it's like it's anyone that's feeling, a little displaced and and having to navigate that.
Yeah, I think that's really cool. If you had a do-over again, and I know with just how it's gone, how it's been marketed, like how would you show that? Like how would people know that it's a
I think
metaphor for,
honestly, the way to
diversity?
market it,
Yeah.
I think the way you could have marketed it is literally like not be. You didn't have to be literal. You could just be talk about can fire and water be together. That's the promise of the premise,
Yes.
and that is like saying can two different like ethnic groups, can two different
Yeah.
races be together, and it's kind of the thing about Pixar that that's what drew me to this project is that
Yeah.
when Pixar is hitting it, it's like it's a character driven grounded story in
Yeah.
grounded want, like Ratatouille, where it's like I just want to be a chef. that's
Yeah.
that's like an independent like movie, right? It's just like a
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
character driven want, but the scope is but I'm a rat, and in a kitchen, a human kitchen, this is now life and death. Now the stakes are life and death.
Yeah.
And basically, we found that with a romance. It's like, oh, it's not these two people want to be together, but she's fire and he's water, and that could be
Yeah.
death for them now. Now the stakes are like death. It's like it, and it's like a metaphor for culture, like being like,
Yeah.
can you as a fire culture and a water culture be together? It's like so smart, you know what I mean? Like to have this
Yes.
represent in so many ways. So you don't even have to say, all you have to say is the promise of the premise is, can this fire person be with this water person? Because then you capture the kind of the romance of it, and you capture the kind of
Yes.
difference and diversity. Can these two different things, people, entities be together? You know what I
Yeah.
mean? Come together. And that's what makes America amazing, right? Is that we have so many, different groups living together,
That's right.
and the synergy of that.
I think it's a beautiful way too for people who are still searching, and not to get, I don't even think it's political when I say this, but diversity became a hot button and huge and mainstream in 2020 post the murders of George Floyd and Breonna Taylor and all of that happening, civil and social unrest in 2020. And in corporate America specifically, a lot of CEOs hired, appointed diversity leaders, right? Chief diversity officers. And it's like, let's bring the lessons of diversity and inclusion to our company or our companies. And there's just a lot out there that felt not organic to like, all right, now all of a sudden we're going to force unconscious bias training. Although I, as a people professional, what that is, someone who's not is like, well, what do you mean? You tell me I'm biased, and like, how do you do that in a way where people can relate to it, right? Versus like all of a sudden, then, at least in my experience, people were like pretty timid about like, do we get into this or not? But it's the right thing to do because that's what's happening in the world. Now, fast forward, it's 2023, the year of efficiency for many companies. And a lot of the first functions to go are these diversity functions that have been built up
I'm
over time,
sure.
right? And so I think about, all right, it's at the end of the day, if you really believe in that as a value of your company, then that's already baked into kind of your ethos, your values, what you believe in, the strategy of your company. And it's my long way of saying, even if you just had people go and watch this, right? And then really, what perspective do you have? Like, what does that tell you about life? And I love how you position it. It is about, can fire and water be together? And
Yeah,
then, the
that's what I
story
love
is
about
like,
it. You don't even
yeah,
have to get into like, I think, people are scared of like controversy, but I'm like, that's the beauty of this movie is that you can talk about diversity in a way that's like, oh, because they're elements, it doesn't
yes,
feel, I'm actually like, oh, it makes it kind of magical. And like, and I think you're right. Like, it's like teaching these things, like, you don't want to be didactic. Like, I almost feel like this, watching Elemental is sort of like a Trojan horse. Like you're wrapping a lesson about diversity in a delightful, fun pack. No one wants to feel like they're taking their medicine. You know what I mean? You want to make
I
it taste
agree.
like candy, but really you're learning something. And that is the most effective way to get to people, because you're right. Like, these kind of, like, when you're forced to sit in a workshop, or like you get
Yes.
resentful, you feel like you're being preached to. But like, if you're going to go watch a movie with your kids and you just think it's about fun elements, and then you're like, oh wow, there's actually a hidden lesson here. Like, it's kind of I think the most effective way to reach people, and to
Yeah.
yeah, Trojan horse it.
Yeah, I love it. Oh my gosh, I use the terminology all the time, like at least in business, when you're trying to do something and actually do something in a very, I'll just call it mainstream way, but there's actually a meaning behind it, right? There's an
Yeah.
intention behind why you're doing it. And so I love that you're saying that. And I think it's a great way too for people to watch this, and actually digest it and realize, okay, the human side of it. What does that mean in my life and humanity? And and it will bring out those themes of, when I was introducing you on my write up about you, and it's like, how do these different cultures mix? And instead of this culture clash, how do you actually ensure that there's an effective culture mix, um, or culture remix, right? Like, I
And the
think
truth
that's,
is,
yeah,
it's like, there is going to be like hardship and clash, but it's
yes,
ultimately, what we're saying is, ultimately it is ultimately a positive thing, and a synergistic thing, right? Even though there's difficulty and friction, of course, when you bring different groups together,
yes.
but I would like to think, ultimately it is a good thing.
I think so. Yeah, and actually, it wouldn't be human if it were easy. You know what I mean? So it's like, of course, there's going to be differences, and of course, there's going to be some friction in
And
terms
that
of
also
just
makes
like,
for
yeah,
comedy, by the way.
yeah,
So it's like, and makes for interesting things to watch. So it's all good when you're watching a story. So you need some challenges, and you need some comedy too. So
oh my gosh, yeah. So everyone, you need to
yeah,
go
check it
out.
out.
You got to go check it out. I'm so excited. I was going to say fired up, not to be
Yeah, you
funny,
can get fired up.
but fired up to
Yeah.
go and see it. And actually, I saw that Nicole just popped in there, fire and water equals steam, and steam as power. Nice. That was a little comment that had popped up.
Nice.
Um, yeah, I mean, everyone tell a friend and go see this. And I think it's also a good way to Trojan horse lessons in humanity and diversity. I hate to be such a nerd about it for companies that are trying to figure it out, right? Like, let let something mainstream do the work for you. I'm
Yeah,
just
it's hard
saying.
to do top down, It's really like, you want to, like, yeah, and that's what I love doing what I do, because I kind of do love doing commercial projects that reach a lot of people. Like, I think that's really
Yeah,
hard to do well. A lot of these commercial projects are kind of hacky, or like,
yeah,
very watered down, and it's hard because the budgets are so large and they
Yeah,
need
yeah,
to reach
yeah.
so many people, there's a lot of fear that drives a lot of decisions around these projects. And so it's really hard to keep these projects, the quality and the specificity like strong, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
And so so I really applaud any commercial, like big commercial movie that can still be good, and it's a really hard thing to do. And so, and to say something on top of it is even
Yeah.
more impressive.
Right. Yeah, it's not just entertainment. Actually, there's a message and a lesson that um, is actually goodness, right? At the end of the day, it's good for humanity when that happens. It's
Yeah,
not
but they
just like,
can't feel like they're
yeah,
learning.
yeah, right. Yeah, it's fascinating. So everyone go and check it out. What are you working on next, Brenda? Can you
Yeah,
talk about it?
I'm
Yeah.
actually well, two things. So I just recently completed, I was on a show called The After Party. It's on Apple Plus. It's a murder mystery comedy, and it's on,
Oh,
it just dropped the second season, and it's really fun, and it's a very diverse cast, and it's just a fun show. And then I will say for myself, my kind of passion project is that I want to be in charge and I want to direct a movie. So I'm trying to direct a movie I wrote a while back, and I'm doing it indie style, like low budget, and it's really exciting because I really feel like I'm at a point in my career where I want to like be in charge, and I have a point of
yeah,
view, and I want to help execute. I want to execute and make sure this is not just my starting with the blueprint of the script, but like making sure it gets made correctly. And so you either can do that as the showrunner of your own show,
sure.
create a show, or because in TV writers are in charge, or in feature director is in charge, so you have to be the director. So either of those paths is like what I'm kind of pursuing and right now.
Amazing.
Yeah.
Amazing. And I think
Obviously,
about
there's a strike going on right now, so things are a little bit tricky and on pause, but
uh,
otherwise, yeah.
I know what's up with that. I mean, I see a lot out there, like different actors, artists that I follow posting that are deeply involved in the strike, which is interesting to me. And I just don't know what's going to come of it, you know?
Yeah, it's a tough time. I mean, listen, I think for writers and for actors, we have some real valid things that we need to protect. Like for writers, the writers' room, and like, everyone needs a fair residual model
Yeah.
from streamers. Also, we have to protect against AI. There's a
Yes.
world where for writers, studios could get AI right now to write a first draft that's just kind of, very basic and not very good, but then hire a writer, a human writer, to like rewrite it. And then the main credit goes to the first writer, which is like ChatGPT. You know what I mean? Like it's like, so we really like, these are very relevant, but
Yeah.
it's also very speculative, right? So people are also not sure where it's going. So both sides, it makes it very hard to negotiate because both sides, I'm sure the producer's side, the studios are really worried about not being able to capitalize on
Yeah.
something. It's everyone's just sort of guessing, and so it's on that a little bit, and so it's a real fraught issue. But
Yeah.
obviously, there needs to be protections, and same for the actors. Like their likenesses and all that stuff. So these are real important issues that have to, and to be honest, the solutions are not easy, right? Like
Yeah.
the actual solutions are tricky. So it's like coming up with those solutions that work for both sides.
Yeah, I agree. It's interesting that you bring up AI, and I know a lot of it's based on that because of, the work product that can be created through artificial or generative artificial intelligence. Now, the difference is, and I think when I was chatting with you yesterday, I had the chance to, and I know there's a few on this CultureCast right now, had the chance to address a group of early in career STEM, early in career interns and early in career first job. And, they're also talking about technology. And I think about the role of AI. And I agree with you. I know that, yes, it can crank out a work product, but I always believe that any new technology and the latest kind of trend with technology requires humanity. And what I
Yeah.
mean by that
It's
is,
certainly right
you
now
know,
where it's sort of like an intern.
yeah,
Like AI
yeah,
is like someone, you still need a human to harness it and see
yes,
it and to edit it and all that stuff. So that is correct currently for sure. And
yeah,
obviously it can do so many, it can be so helpful, obviously. It can be a great thing, but it's also like so scary. I'm just not personally, I'm not just scared for job loss, but more about like our existential, like, like spreading disinformation and really like the
Yes.
level of chaos. It feels real. The fact that it's not regulated at all and we're all like kind of racing for this cliff, but as you get closer, the view gets more and more beautiful.
Yeah,
It's
right.
just
It gets
so scary.
beautiful, but also don't fall off that cliff.
Yeah.
And,
Well,
yeah, I hear you. I think it is that there's a pro and con to it, and it's fascinating to me. You're right. It is like this intern, um, and at the same time, no matter how honed in that product gets, whoever's developing it. I know we've already had conversations I have with other people around like the diversity of the people, who are behind the scenes programming AI. I mean, that's an opportunity. And then like the output that comes out still requires judgment, emotion,
totally.
humanizing, right? And so I
And I
think
especially
that's
think
yeah,
for comedy, like I feel like AI is going to take a while to do comedy because half of being funny is being unpredictable. It's being surprising. And like these
yes,
are all built on predictive technology. Like that's how these work. You know what I mean? So it's like it's to teach it to be unpredictable seems hard or not
yeah,
inherent in the way it's built.
yeah. I love that you pointed that out. Absolutely, there's no way to predict a good joke or a good thing that happens, um, in a comedy. That's great. And then I do want to point out, the after party as well as Truth Be Told. I mean, both are very diverse casts.
Yeah.
So, I
Yeah.
mean, right on.
Yeah.
I think it's awesome.
Well, it's
Um,
funny because I do think that's not a coincidence. I think
yeah,
they are learning like as now, like they're like, oh, if we're gonna have diversity on fit forward facing, we need to have diversity behind the camera also to ring true. So I think that is something that yeah that it's funny because like I feel like being Asian has never helped me. Like if anything, getting into an Ivy League school, it's harder to be Asian.
yeah.
And so like in Hollywood though, I'm like, oh, this is like actually going to be helpful. I'm like, yeah, I'll take it.
I mean, take all you can. I think it's pretty amazing, but it's also like that in any other industry, right? I think about companies where their frontline hourly employees are majority people of color, and then behind the scenes, kind of running the company, they're not. And
Yeah,
so, and that's changing too. I'm saying it's
good.
not happening at all, but I think
Yeah,
everyone's on that pathway to do that. And so, it's been interesting listening and learning about the industry that you've been a part of, your specific experience as a woman, as an Asian American, and both the challenges and the successes as a result. And so I know people engaging this conversation will be really curious, what advice you would give them. I know you've already shared lessons learned. Any more lessons learned in your journey? And then what advice would you give people just to make their way, in their life? Because everyone's doing different things. Yeah.
well, I mean, I can speak to at least this industry,
Okay.
trying to make it. I think you got to know yourself a little bit. Like you listen, obviously in this industry, you have to have some talent, you have to be
Yeah.
hardworking, but you also have to have a level of you got to be okay with like risk and
Yeah.
not knowing, you know what I mean? And it's like it's funny like my sister is, she went to med school, like she's the older sibling,
Yeah.
like she could not handle this level of like uncertainty and risk, like just
Yes.
as a person. It's just, like you get on a show, most shows get canceled, you're out of a job, you have to find another job, you don't know when that next job's going to
Yeah.
be. So that's like, I will say when I talk to people about going into this field, I'm like, obviously you have to have talent and hard work, but like that third thing of just, can you handle this? This is not an
Yeah.
easy, you know what I mean? Like you are freelance and it
Yeah.
is, and can you handle that? That's all. Um, and yeah, that's it. And then, as I said, you got to be, for writing, especially, you really have to be self-disciplined. And I would
Yeah.
say you have to be a creator and an editor. You have to be able to create and you have to be able to edit. And I
Yeah.
think you have to toggle between those two, because when you're in create mode, you cannot have your editor too loud, because if
Yeah.
your editor's too loud, it stifles your creation, like before you can even put it on the page. And then,
Sure.
but once you get on the page, you have to turn into kind of a harsher editor that's like, you can beat that, you can cut that, you don't just settle. So it's like you kind of have to have both sides of your brain, but you have to be able to kind of switch between the two.
Agreed. Oh my gosh, that's such sage advice for people who are trying to make it no matter what industry. Um, I think it's this next generation coming into the workforce today, what they're dealing with, right? I love that you said, first of all, you need to know yourself. I believe in that. Like, get real clarity about that. That doesn't mean you have to go around and, piss everybody off from what you believe, but actually getting really clear on your center and like what drives you and your passion. I think
Hmm.
that's important. And I love too that there has to be some level of risk taking and resilience at the same time, especially because the world has changed today. The way people are going to be employed today is different. You know,
Yeah.
AI, there are implications.
Across the
Yeah,
board. Yeah.
that's right, across the board, right? And so I think that's a good lesson learned. I think the other thing that I'm hearing you say is, whether you're a creative person or a technical person, and in your case, you're both, right? Because you're creating, when you talk about, writing and editing, that's both, and you need to be disciplined at both. I think it's a good piece of advice for people that, when I think about diversity of style, let's just say that, right? That you may have a tendency towards one way. And, an example that I was telling you about yesterday is that I met with a lot of engineers, software developers, data scientists, all these early in career young people that are just beginning their career. And the piece of advice that I gave them was, you know, don't forget the interpersonal side.
Mm.
Don't forget that human side that I think is really important in what you're doing, because you will continue to grow and learn on the technical side, but in order to evolve, right? In order to be a leader, which many of
Yeah.
them are like, I want to be a leader and I want to, move up or whatever it is, start my own company. There is a level of creativity, interpersonal, that people need to have. And so I love that that's how I'm listening to
No,
you.
for
And it's like,
sure. And it's
yeah,
funny because I do think some people who do want to be leaders, like they're very talented at what they do, whether it's programming or writing. But then,
yeah,
like you're right, there's a whole other skill set that's just people
absolutely.
skills, managing people. Like that is those two don't necessarily go together. And it's just like, and honestly, like I also believe there's a world where there's some people that like want to rise, but they want to stay and they don't want to be people managers. They don't want to,
Yeah,
they just want to do what they're good at.
yeah,
And I think there should
yeah,
be a path to rising that doesn't force you into leadership positions. You know what I mean? Like, just
yeah,
because you want to make more money and get more prestige doesn't mean that you can stop it. You have to stop being an engineer and be a manager. Like, you
right.
know what I mean? Like, I think there's like paths depending on the person and what they are good at and what they want to do.
Yeah, I totally agree. I think in the business world, definitely the tech side of it has figured that out, like how you can continue in your journey, continue to rise in your career versus taking on that management side. But, you are pointing out the dilemma for a lot of leaders and human resources, people, like that is the dilemma, right? It is about
Mhm.
like all of a sudden people who are really good at what they do then get thrown into these leadership roles and they have no clue unless they
Mhm.
already are naturally talented at that. And
Yeah,
that,
or just have a
yeah,
natural knack for it. But
yeah,
like,
and
that's rare.
it's unusual. Yeah, I was
Yeah.
gonna say that is unusual.
Yeah.
Interesting.
But I mean, I'm
Um,
glad that people are, I mean, listen, I think that like the solution is to have to you can have multiple paths, you know what I mean,
yeah,
to rise on. So yeah, I'm glad that people are addressing that.
yeah, I am too. It's pretty amazing. All right, I know we have a few minutes left. I always love asking because we do talk about culture. Your favorite things, right? So, what are you loving these days? Either eating, watching, wearing, doing in life?
It's so funny. I am very food motivated, so
Okay.
I have this running, and we live in LA, and
Yeah.
it's like such an amazing. What I love, I mean, talk about diversity. Like
Yeah.
this place is all about having the most diverse food scene, like
Yeah.
Koreatown, Thai town, like San
Yeah.
Gabriel Valley, like like the Mexican food and all the different regions of Mexico, and like we're so lucky, and so I kind of have this running list of like I call it my to eat list, and I
Yes.
will put like new restaurants that I want to try on it, and it's always like full and it's always got cool stuff. But yeah, I mean, obviously, like I'm trying to think of a latest one. I mean, obviously, Pizza Palace is amazing. It's like Indian Italian fusion, and it's like blowing up.
What?
Yeah, it's really good. It's in Silver Lake, but it's already like impossible to get in because
Yeah,
it's
I
like
bet.
so popular. And watching wise, I really love The Great.
Okay.
It's on Hulu. It's about like Catherine the Great. It's about a strong lady.
Yes.
It's
She's not
funny and
that's
it's
on my
smart.
list. Yes.
Mhm. I'm into that. And yeah, what am I wearing? I thought that was very funny. I kind of love a bulky, I love a cardigan. So
Yeah.
I'm a big fan of Isabel Marant. She makes great sweater
Yes.
cardigans. And but for the summer, I basically just try to cover up and have long sleeves and long skirts and a hat. I have a hat addiction. I have so many hats.
Oh my
I
gosh.
literally have a stack of hats in my house that's like about to tip over.
That's really smart. I think it's good too, that way you don't get any kind of skin cancer in the long term. It's really
Yes,
important.
Asians like to stay out
Yeah.
of the sun, so
Yeah. I love the area that you're in. I mean, Silver Lake. I grew up in LA and we had relatives that were not too far away from Silver Lake. They lived right there on Rampart and Beverly, kind of that
mhm.
area. Um, and we used to go to Echo Park back in the day. Now Echo Park is like super cool, like, towards that area. So I think it's neat that it is very hipster. It's
Yes,
kind of like what Williamsburg was and
totally. It is
is,
in
right? And
Williamsburg, LA.
yeah, right. And we used to live in Williamsburg when we were in New York. So yeah, I love that area that you're living in. And I love that you're finding all these great food places. You're right. It's hard to get in anywhere in Silver Lake, quite frankly. I think it's
Yeah, I
hard.
mean, you're right. There's a ton of Filipino restaurants
Yeah.
actually in Eagle Rock, Silver Lake. I
Yes.
mean, there's historic Filipino town that's like getting all gentrified now too.
That's right. Filipino town is getting gentrified. I need to make my way up there. Just have to.
Yeah, it's
Um,
great.
well, Brenda, we're coming to the top of the hour. I so enjoyed just chatting with you and
Yeah,
like
it's so
learning about
fun.
your life. A lot of it resonates with me. I can feel you on all of this. It's amazing. And so I want to thank you so much for being so open and so giving of your time and your insight with people on the
Oh
Culture
well, thanks
Cast.
for having me.
All right,
It's fun
everyone.
chatting.
Well, we will see you next time. Actually, how can people get a hold of you? I want to make sure I ask that.
Oh, I guess I have an Instagram, I guess,
Okay.
but I'm not really big on social media.
Okay.
So, but that is, I guess, the one. It's like just my first letter B and my last name, Hsueh.
Perfect. So if you want to find Brenda, it's her first initial last name, and we will make sure we post that in the show notes. And our next Culture Cast is actually live a week from now. We will be chatting with the CEO of an AI company called Instill, and they have figured out how to codify culture of all things within companies. Like, how do you measure values and how does that translate to outcomes in a company? So I will get my full nerd on with that, and hopefully the rest of you who want to be in on that will too. And for now, Brenda, we will see you later. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
All right, bye everybody.
Bye.